Welcome to this deep dive, crafted just for you, the learner. We're going to explore something, well, something we all experience, but maybe don't examine too closely.
Exactly. Those sudden flashes of understanding.
Yeah, those aha moments, the ones that can sort of reframe everything, like finding a hidden door you never knew was there.
And today, our goal is really to shed some light on what these epiphanies are all about. We'll be looking at ideas around how our minds, organize the world.
Right, looking at why they happen and maybe if there are any clues, any telltale signs one might be coming.
The idea is to unpack the sort of magical feeling around them and see if we can spot some maybe surprising patterns underneath it all.
Okay, let's dive in. So imagine you're in a really dim room. You know the light switch is there somewhere, but you're just fumbling around, getting more and more frustrated.
Right, feeling around in the dark.
And then, bam, your hand just lands right on it. That feeling, that sudden clarity, what's actually going on there.
Well, that simple example, it actually shows a really core principle of how we perceive things.
Yeah.
Our minds aren't just passive sponges soaking up data.
No.
No, they actively structure what we sense. Think about the concept of figure and ground.
Figure and ground. Okay, so the light switch becomes the important thing, that's the figure, and the wall behind it is just the background.
Exactly.
Wow.
Precisely. The switch was physically there all along, but it only emerges as the distinct figure when your attention shifts, when your mind prioritizes it. Until that moment, it's just part of the undifferentiated ground.
Huh. So an epiphany, that aha moment, it's like that mental switch just flicks on. It's a reprioritization of what our mind's focusing on.
That's a great way to put it. It's a reorganization of our perception. It can be subtle or,
Right.
quite dramatic. It affects what we see or feel, or maybe how we're thinking about a problem.
So the key takeaway here for you, the learner, might be this. If you're feeling stuck, maybe try flipping what you're focusing on. The answer could be hiding in what seems like background noise.
That's it. Sometimes the obstacle is how we're looking.
Okay, this makes me think of, I read about this chess grandmaster. He was completely stuck in this really crucial game, getting more and more frustrated.
Mhm.
And then, just like that, instantly, he saw not just the next move, but like the entire game laid out. It felt totally obvious, but also kind of miraculous, which brings up this idea of tension, right?
Oh, absolutely. That story perfectly illustrates how important that tension is,
Yeah.
that frustration he felt. It isn't just, a bad feeling to get rid of.
Okay.
In Gestalt psychology, we talk about unfinished business. It's like the psychological version of a song that stops before the last note. There's this sense of incompleteness.
Unfinished business, like that nagging feeling when something just doesn't add up or feels off.
Precisely. Our minds really crave closure. They're wired for completeness, for resolving these kinds of imbalances.
Mhm.
So when a situation or a problem resists being resolved easily, it creates this internal friction, this cognitive dissonance.
So that uncomfortable nagging feeling might actually be your brain saying it's close, that it's working on it. Embrace the discomfort.
You can say that.
Oh, yeah?
It's within that very tension, that unresolved, unfinished business, that the conditions for an epiphany often really start to form.
It's like stretching a rubber band, maybe. For you, the learner, the more you stretch it, the more you grapple with the problem, the more potential energy builds up. For it to suddenly snap back with that movement, the aha moment.
Okay, so let's think about how these shifts, these understandings actually appear to us. Imagine walking through a really dense forest.
Okay.
At first, it's just, a mess of trees everywhere. But then as you move, maybe you shift your angle slightly, and suddenly a clear path just reveals itself.
Yes, exactly. The path was always there, wasn't it? But your change in perspective, your viewpoint, allowed it to emerge as distinct from the background clutter. This links right into the Gestalt principle of emergence.
Emergence.
Yeah, the idea that coherent patterns can arise from what initially just looks like random bits and pieces. So those sudden epiphanies aren't really popping out of thin air. It's more like our minds finally recognizing or prioritizing patterns that were maybe there all along, just out of focus.
That's a really key insight. The feeling of suddenness comes from that rapid reorganization of our whole perceptual field. One moment, it's scattered puzzle pieces. The next, they just click into place.
Right.
But the groundwork for that click, well, that's usually been laid over time, often unconsciously.
You mentioned figure ground earlier. That classic optical illusion, the one that's like two faces looking at each other, or it's a vase. It always gets me.
Yes, Rubens' vase. It's a perfect demonstration of how fluid our perception really is. The image itself doesn't change, but our interpretation flips, right,
Right.
between the faces and the vase. Both are valid ways of seeing it.
Yeah, it's like my brain can only lock onto one as the main thing, the figure, at any given moment.
Exactly. And that's often how it works with epiphanies, too. They don't necessarily change the external reality, but they fundamentally transform our relationship to it. What was just part of the background noise can suddenly become the central focus, the key insight.
So that aha moment isn't always about finding some kind of objective external truth. Sometimes it's just a new subjective way of seeing things that suddenly feels
Right.
coherent.
That's a really important distinction to make. Our deep-seated need for coherence, for things to make sense, is incredibly powerful. So yes, sometimes an epiphany is less about an external discovery and more about an internal shift that finally satisfies that need for things to fit together.
This makes me wonder about how much we rely on, pure logic to solve problems. It sounds like these epiphanies involve something more,
Yeah.
something beyond just rationality.
You're absolutely right. Logic is crucial, of course, but epiphanies often bring in intuition. That gut feeling, that sense of resonance, it just feels right. And while you can't just, you know, force an epiphany to happen on demand.
Right, you can't just schedule one for 3 p.m.
No. But you can try to cultivate the conditions that make them more likely, paying attention to those subtle cues we were talking about.
So conditions like really intense concentration on the problem, just focusing harder.
Well, interestingly, it's not always about more focus. Think about our person in the dark room again. What often happens when they stop frantically searching for a second?
Got it. Maybe take a breath.
Exactly. They become more present in the space. Their senses might recalibrate slightly. They might notice a subtle shadow or a change in air current, something they missed while they were desperately searching.
So sometimes the breakthrough comes when we actually stop chasing it so hard.
Precisely. Epiphanies seem to require this kind of balance. There's the engagement phase, the active work, gathering information, struggling with it. But then there's also the need for allowing a degree of stillness, of release, letting the mind process and make connections without that constant conscious strain. Clarity can often emerge when we create that space, step back a bit.
It's like that saying, you can't see the forest for the trees. Sometimes you have to step back to actually see the whole picture.
That's a perfect analogy. In Gestalt terms, we talk about the field, the totality of our awareness at any given moment. An epiphany isn't just about a new piece of information entering that field. It's often a fundamental restructuring of the entire field.
Going back to that chess grandmaster, his insight wasn't just about one specific move, was it? It was bigger than that.
Exactly. It was a shift from focusing only on the individual pieces, the immediate figures, to grasping the larger pattern, the overall strategic flow of the game. That became the new dominant figure. It's figure ground organization, but on a much larger, more complex scale.
You also mentioned closure before, that drive we have to complete things. How does that play into these sudden insights?
Oh, that drive for closure is incredibly strong. Think about seeing an incomplete circle. Your mind almost automatically fills in the gap, right?
Yeah, it wants to see it as whole.
Well, that same drive operates cognitively. An unsolved problem, an unanswered question, it creates a kind of mental gap, a sense of incompleteness. And our minds are strongly compelled to resolve that tension, to fill that gap. This need for completion is a really powerful engine driving us towards insight.
And what about reversibility? Like with the faces and the vase, how does that relate to actually finding solutions?
Reversibility highlights the power of perspective. When we get stuck on a problem, it's often because we're locked into seeing it from just one angle, one fixed viewpoint.
Right.
An epiphany can happen when we manage somehow to flip that perspective, like flipping the vase to see the faces. Suddenly, what was just background might become the key element, revealing a solution that was effectively hidden in plain sight before.
This is all, wow, incredibly insightful. You mentioned potentially 7 signs that an epiphany might be on its way. Could you maybe walk us through those for us, the learner?
Absolutely. And it's helpful to think of these signs not as guarantees, but as reflections of different phases in the journey towards insight. They mirror the dynamic shifts happening within our perceptual field.
Okay.
So the first one is mounting tension. This might feel like frustration, anxiety, being really stuck. But from a Gestalt perspective, it represents the buildup of that unresolved tension within the field. It suggests a significant shift might be needed, like pressure building along a fault line.
Huh. So that feeling of being really, really stuck and just wanting to give up could actually mean I'm close.
It very well could be. It signals that the current configuration isn't stable. The second sign is closely related, the feeling of incompleteness. It's that nagging sense that something crucial is missing, that the current way of looking at things just isn't adequate.
Like there has to be a better way, or I feel like I'm overlooking something really obvious.
Exactly, that it reflects a kind of misalignment in the figure-ground relationship. The problem hasn't been properly differentiated or understood yet. Then, number 3 is sudden associations. These are those fleeting thoughts that seem to pop into your head, maybe even feeling totally random or unrelated to the problem you're working on.
Uh-huh.
But these are often the mind trying to bridge gaps, making tentative links between disparate elements. It's searching for underlying patterns, what we sometimes call isomorphic relationships, recognizing similar structures or dynamics across different domains.
Like when I'm thinking hard about work and suddenly have an idea about, I don't know, gardening, but it somehow sparks something back for the work problem.
Precisely, that cross-pollination.
Mm-hmm.
Your brain is making those subconscious connections. The fourth sign is interesting. Time distortion.
Losing track of time.
Yes. People often report that as an insight gets closer, their normal sense of time dissolves. They become completely absorbed in the problem, in the perceptual field. Hours might feel like minutes.
Yeah, I know that feeling of being totally lost in thought.
Then, number 5 is hyperfocus. This is that intense narrowing of attention onto the specifics of the problem. It can feel almost obsessive sometimes.
Right, like tunnel vision.
Exactly. And while staying stuck there too long can be counterproductive, it often seems to be a necessary step where the mind tries to really isolate the core figure from the surrounding ground, kind of clearing the decks for the breakthrough.
So that intense focus can be a good sign, a precursor.
It can be, yes. Leading to number 6, emotional excitement. Insights are rarely just cold intellectual events. They often come with a palpable surge of emotion, joy, relief, excitement.
That eureka feeling, that rush.
Exactly. That emotional release is basically the dissipation of all that pent-up tension we talked about earlier. The greater the tension buildup, often the more powerful the emotional release.
Makes sense.
And finally, number 7 is metaphorical thinking. As we get closer to an insight, the mind often starts playing with metaphors, drawing parallels between the problem and seemingly unrelated things.
Like trying on different ways to frame the problem.
Precisely. It's inherently a Gestalt process, recognizing underlying structural similarities, collapsing complex relationships into simpler, more relatable forms. It's like the mind is priming itself, finding the right angle for that final leap into clarity.
Wow. So these 7 signs, they really paint a picture of insight not as some random lightning strike, but as the outcome of this whole dynamic process unfolding in our minds.
That's the idea. It's a journey with recognizable phases, even if it feels mysterious while you're in it.
You mentioned isomorphism, again, those structural similarities. How does that explain why these aha moments feel so right when they happen, almost inevitable?
Well, isomorphism suggests that the solutions, the patterns we're seeking, often exist in a kind of latent form within our minds already, almost like blueprints waiting to be recognized or activated. Think of a musician composing a melody. Certain combinations of notes just feel harmonious, right? Not necessarily because of some objective rule, but because they resonate, they align with these pre-existing mental structures that recognize harmony, balance, completion. So the epiphany feels inevitable, perhaps, because the pattern was, in a sense, already there, waiting for the right conditions to be perceived.
So when we have that insight, it feels almost like a recognition, like remembering something our mind already intuitively understood on some deeper level.
That's a beautiful way to put it, yes. The challenge then is, how do we bring that implicit understanding into conscious awareness? And that's where the dynamics of attention become absolutely crucial.
Attention. Right, we talked about hyperfocus, but you also mentioned the importance of letting the mind wander, sort of.
Yes, attention isn't static. It's a dynamic force. While intense, focused attention helps us analyze and define the problem, isolate the figure, it can also create blind spots. We can get stuck seeing only what we're looking for.
Right. We miss things on the periphery.
Exactly.
Oh.
And interestingly, many insights famously occur during periods of defocused attention. You know, when you're showering or going for a walk, doing something routine where your mind is free to roam.
Yeah, the classic shower epiphany.
It's classic for a reason. During these times, those previously suppressed elements in the background of the perceptual field, the ground, have a chance to surface and connect in new ways. It's almost like your brain, the natural self-organizing capacity takes over when you stop consciously trying to control everything, like your body healing itself.
So sometimes the best thing to do to find an answer is actually to step away from actively trying to find it. Let your subconscious or background processes take over.
It often seems that way. It's this delicate interplay between intentional focus, the active engagement, and allowing for a more diffuse, receptive mode of processing. Stepping back literally gives your mind the space to reorganize the field in novel ways.
It still sounds like even with these patterns and signs, the actual moment of insight retains a kind of elusiveness. It still feels a bit unpredictable.
Oh, absolutely. That's the inherent paradox of insight, isn't it? Despite identifying these underlying dynamics, the sheer complexity and richness of our perceptual field mean there will always be aspects hidden in the shadows, things we're not consciously aware of.
So there's always an element of mystery.
Always. Which leads to another interesting point.
Yeah.
Insight isn't really the final destination, is it?
Yeah.
It feels more like opening a new door rather than arriving at the end of the road.
That's a great way to think about it, like reaching the horizon.
Exactly. You reach what you thought was the horizon, only to realize there's always another one stretching out beyond it. Insight often marks the beginning of a whole new cycle of inquiry. New questions arise. The perceptual field is never static. It's constantly evolving, rearranging, inviting new perspectives, deeper exploration.
We've talked about the mind's drive for order, for coherence, and also the ambiguity, maybe the chaos of the world. It sounds like epiphanies happen right at that fascinating intersection.
That's a crucial point. The mind strives for coherence, for things to make sense, to fit together neatly.
Yeah.
But reality often presents us with ambiguity, complexity, maybe even chaos. Epiphanies often represent finding a novel way to bring a sense of order or a new kind of coherence to that chaos. And this process inevitably disrupts the mind's existing state of equilibrium, that ongoing moment-to-moment recalibration of figure and ground. Insight throws things off balance, even as it brings understanding. It can lead to both clarity and a new kind of uncertainty about what else might be out there.
So even after that big aha moment, there's still this sense that, okay, what next? There's more to learn, more layers to uncover.
Absolutely. Think back to our chess grandmaster again.
Yeah.
Even after seeing the whole game, realizing the winning strategy, well, executing it presents new challenges, new complexities emerge. Deeper levels of understanding are needed.
Right.
Knowledge, in this sense, is an infinite landscape. Understanding is a continuous journey, isn't it? Not a final destination you arrive at.
And these insights, they're not just about understanding external things like chess games or problems, are they? They must also shape how we understand ourselves.
Profoundly so. Insights are deeply personal experiences. They reshape our relationship not just with the world, but with ourselves. There's a Gestalt concept of self as process. Seeing the self not as a fixed thing, but as a fluid, dynamic process that's constantly evolving through interactions and understandings.
Okay.
So when we have an insight, we're not just learning something new. We're often integrating new capacities, new perspectives into our very sense of identity. And crucially, insights often reveal our own limitations too, making us more aware of what we don't know.
It seems like it all comes back to that idea of trusting the process, doesn't it? Even when it feels confusing or frustrating or like you're going nowhere.
Precisely. It connects to what we call organismic self-regulation, a fundamental trust in the inherent intelligence of our minds, our whole being, to find its way towards health, understanding, and integration. It requires a certain humility, really.
Humility.
Yeah, an acknowledgement that we can't always consciously force or control the outcome. We have to trust the internal process, trust the field, allow things to unfold.
So if insight is this doorway, like you said, leading to more questions, deeper understanding, what lies beyond it? Is it about going deeper into that specific understanding or expanding outwards into totally new areas?
The big question. I suspect it's both, really. It's simultaneously a journey inward towards a more profound, integrated understanding of ourselves and the patterns we carry, and a journey outward towards an ever-expanding awareness of the richness and complexity of the world around us and our relationship to it.
Both deeper and wider. Okay. So as you reflect on this deep dive, the learner maybe think about the potential aha moments, the light switches waiting to emerge in your own life. What hidden connections or perspectives might be just under the surface right now?
Perhaps just by becoming a little more aware of those subtle precursors we discussed, that building tension maybe, or those unexpected associations that seem to come from nowhere, you can become more attuned to the quiet brewing of your own breakthroughs.
Yeah. Remember, the pursuit of insight isn't really about finding all the definitive answers. Maybe it's more about embracing the questions and enjoying that ongoing, fascinating dance between achieving clarity and living with the ever-present mystery. What new questions has this exploration sparked for you? We definitely encourage you to keep exploring the remarkable world of human perception and the power of those transformative aha moments.